Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Monday, I'm Mover, and today we've got a busy episode talking about the Alpha Dogfight trials that DARPA put on last week. Widely requested video, especially after I did the Elon Musk who said a video about the fighter era is over, and people are saying, well, this is proof because bottom line up front, they did 5 dogfights and 5 out of 5 were flawless victories by the AI. But is that really the case? We're going to take a look at it. We'll watch the fights, and I'll talk about them as we go, and then I'll look at some of the comments from the developers themselves, or those that actually were part of the winning team, and then give some thoughts on kind of how this translates to the real world and whether or not it really is indicative of the fighter era being over.
3, 2, 1, fight off.
All right, let's get started. Alpha Dogfights trial event, here we go. So they started off with a time hack, which every brief starts with, so they treat this like a real fighter brief. They go up the objectives, which you'd usually put up on the board. These are BFM objectives: kill and survive, recognize and exploit adversary weakness, maneuver to a position of control, 100% valid shots and kills, deny defeat, WEZ, which is the weapons engagement zone, which is a little funny that they have 100% valid shots and kills, and I'll talk about why later after we look at what the other guy said. So this is what's called a chord ladder. Usually you don't do this for a BFM fight, but I mean it's the ladder here, the Spence ladder. So you got blue is the AI, red is Banger in the JSB Sim F-16, which is not a high fidelity model from what I understand. I'm looking at, I mean, it's not DCS or anything. The physics are probably okay, but the graphics are not that great. He went to weapons school. In fact, a friend of the channel actually trained him. They're fighting the champion who's beaten everyone. They're going to use their scoring rules, and then there's 5 neutral sets, guns only, so no missiles of any kind, aim 9 or otherwise. They talk about the visuals, which we'll look at. Closure, which is V sub C, if you hear me say that, same thing. The heading, altitude, speed, climb in feet per second, the track angle, and the G's pulled, and then this is their health, just like Mortal Kombat. All right, so the intel human, his Banger, he's flying the F-16. He's a senior pilot, WIC graduate, limited training time, but resourceful and highly adaptive. So he hasn't spent a whole lot of time in the sim, and again, I'll talk about this at the end, why that's important. He is a DC Air Guard guy, huh? Imagine that. So he got roped into this deal. Let's see, do they do this for the AI? They sure do. Falco, he's a JSB Sim F-16, reinforcement, learning agent, league-based training, highly aggressive, capable adversary, favors quick gun kills at merges. So head-on gunshots, which you'll see here in a second. Here we go. Set 1. So they're right at 3,000 feet, merged, 2921, 16,000 feet, and they merge at, we'll see what it says here in a second. An old boy in his sim. He must be trying to get man days or something. He's a guard guy. He's a DC Air Guard guy. All right, 300 knots, neutral merge. Green light, go. So they initially start off turning. It's kind of this hybrid 2-circle thing as he comes over the top, and then transition to a 1-circle downhill fight. Banger uses God's G over the top, Heron uses God's G over the top. Banger's underneath. Banger could have had a shot there if he's working by the same rules, but Banger's doing what we do in real life, which is trying to maneuver to the control zone here. So they come back for the second single circle merge, and it looks like Heron is taking face shots. So very close range face shots, and takes a little bit of damage, not much. So he comes back around for the 1-circle merge, and again, he gets the pipper on, which those are really hard shots to make in general. I mean, we don't train to this, so Those are very hard shots to do. And then Banger comes over the top. You can see he's maneuvering a little bit more aggressively over the top, but Heron, that's probably his best gunshot to date there, because he actually gets established here and a little bit better. And then right here, that is high plan form. He's in an offensive position. I think that's a good track. So good job out of Heron on that one. So what we see in the first one is kind of a high reliance on merge shots, as he talked about in the brief. So that's something that he knew about, and very high aspect gunshots. Banger seemed to be doing more of the standard Viper game plan. All right, fight 2. Here we go. Banger's very aggressive here. He's pulling, well, he's only pulling 4 Gs, but he's slowing down to 200 knots. They started at 300 knots again. Banger right here could get nose on, but he's actually maneuvering to a follow-on shot. So he's not taking those shots of opportunity like Heron would have. He's trying to think of follow-on BFM, following him up around the top, a little bit of a barber pole as they're climbing uphill. He's fairly offensive. He could get the nose on right now and take the same kind of shot that Heron's been taking. However, Heron manages to square the corner and shoot him. And now they fall off, kind of low speed. Heron has really conserved his energy, especially as he's coming over the top, using God's G to help him out. He's pulling, I can't read that, but it's significantly more. But again, Banger's in a good position, but again, Heron's taking that high. That's a fully high aspect gunshot right in the face. So I think follow on BFM, Banger actually was pushing towards the control zone there, but in this case, when you've got an adversary that has no problems taking those shots, Banger needs to get out of plane in jank. I mean, he has to do that. Okay, here we go. Next set. Same thing, 400 knots. They're low altitude, so they've got a lot more energy, 7,000 feet. So Banger brings it around fairly quickly. He's letting his speed get away from him a little bit, 460 knots, so he's on the fast side. Meanwhile, Heron kind of goes over the top and then right to the face shot again. So they get the merge, neutral, but Banger's got more energy to play with. He's coming over the top. He actually is about to put himself in an offensive position, but does not. And then here Heron comes over the top. That is a close pass there. But then he comes back around, and that's just another high aspect pass. Yeah, he's trying to avoid the gun at this point, and in doing so, actually Syrian lead turns right in front of Heron, and Heron saddles up. This is a saddle kill. So same result as set 1, where he avoids the gun shot in the face and ends up getting saddled up. Yeah, you're looking at the zoom down there, it definitely doesn't look like it's DCS level graphics or fidelity. So I don't know what kind of sim they have as far as VR fidelity, but it doesn't look that great. Reset, 350 knots, 3,000 feet. Oh, sorry, 13,000 feet, 360 knots. 3-0. Banger down low. So it's basically a look down for Heron, coming low to high. And this time, Heron doesn't seem to go straight for the face shot. He kind of lags a little bit. I don't know if the thing's learning or not. But they're basically in this one circle uphill fight. Neutral at the merge, but it looks like a BFM error from Banger, and then Heron just squares the corner and shoots him, again, with a very high aspect gunshot. But Heron uses the vertical, comes over the top, and this will be a lot of plan form. And now, I don't know if he lost sight or what in that one, because that was a lot uglier. So far, 4-0 in favor of the AI. All right, so this one's at 14,000 feet, 300 knots. I think he just said he was going to try something different this time. Again, the one circle fight. Heron's going up, Banger staying mostly level. That's a fairly offensive position. He could take the shot, but he bids to lag, and in doing so, they force a second merge. He kind of gets his nose trapped, and now they're in kind of a roller here, where he's bidding to the low 6 there. He's letting his speed get away from him, though. He's at 350 knots, and when you're one circle like this, and Heron's doing a great job of maintaining his speed, or its speed, it pushes Banger out in front, and now that one circle geometry has, where he was going to be a little bit offensive, he's now pushing to defensive as they go downhill, and it looks like here Heron's going to have a nice high planform shot. And there you go. Inside of 500 feet there, he takes the shot. And then at this point, I don't know. I mean, with that high heading crossing angle, high closure rate, Banger may have been able to reverse on that, but he keeps the turn going, trying to get towards the deck, because I think they said that they were wanting to test whether Heron could do that at low altitude. He's pulling 9 Gs, and then there you go. See, that's a good high heading crossing angle, high aspect angle shot. Banger keeps the turn going in kind of a no-sight defense, where he could have reversed there and maybe forced an overshoot. But instead, offset turn circle geometry allows Heron to come back around and get basically right back into the control zone. And now it's just a matter of offset turn circles. He's being patient. Banger is way too fast at 600 knots. He's arcing at this point, so he's on the limiter, and his turn circle is just opening up, and which is allowing Heron to come in and get that stable guns track back there and just be completely offensive. And again, another reversal opportunity here at the floor, but he just keeps his turn going. I don't know if he sees him. I mean, honestly, it doesn't, appear, but Heron's doing a good job of doing offset turn circles and just being patient, which AI would. And now that's a very stable gun track where he basically flushes the lag. Banger's not doing any kind of jinx, any kind of defensive maneuvers. He's just graping around there, 9 Gs, and I can't read the airspeed, but I'm sure it's greater than 400 knots. So that's a very stable gun track, and that's the kill. So flawless victory once again. So, yeah, human loses 5 out of 5 times. So let's talk about a couple things. In a real briefing, if we were to go brief this, one of the things I'd brief is the training rules. So in both the Air Force and the Navy, we don't allow high aspect gunshots. And by high aspect gunshots, I mean in the Air Force, it's 135 degrees on the gun. So any face shots. So anytime you feel like you have to bunt, or anytime you're in that front quarter, we don't do that. There's a couple reasons. One, for training, it's unsafe, and I know this is a combat situation, so it doesn't matter quite as much. But the second thing is it's a low probability of kill shot. It is very hard to be accurate with the gun and get that shot. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because one of the things that the developer said was that all they had to do for the criteria was be in the cone. There was no trigger pull at all.
Dr. Oss, 2013 asked, it wasn't clear if the damage was caused by simply having the cone on target, or if there was a trigger pull required as well. If the pull was required, did you work on anticipating the target?
Yeah, so damage in this engagement was simply by having the cone on target. So there's no trigger pull, which is, really nice, because our agent doesn't have to learn that sort of really sparse pulling the trigger to getting the reward for damage on target. I think that answers the question pretty well.
So you can see all he had to do was get that cone, be inside of 3,000 feet, and they call that a guns track. So they're not really evaluating Pipper mech and the ability to do that, because it is a very hard skill to have. Trust me, I mean, having been in real jets, it's not easy. So that's one of the things that stood out from the beginning. At the brief, you'd say, hey, the training rules are in accordance with 11.2.14. Here's what we're going to do. Let's talk about the good stuff first, because I know what I'm about to say after this is going to trigger the world, or at least the people that watch this. The good is it shows that AI is advancing and developing. It shows, as he talks about, Glock talks about it here after this, the ability to put this learning AI into manned aircraft will help in the future to give you better software, better symbology. It's a good thing to have.
And it's really, you look at this and you say, okay, well, the AI got 5, our human got 0. it's easy to go down the wrong path of thinking that that is either A, definitive in some way as to what the future of BFM looks like, or B, that it is a bad outcome. From a human perspective, from the fighter pilot world, we talked about, we trust what works. And what we saw was that in this limited area, in this specific scenario, we've got AI that works. And when I'm going downrange, when I'm going into combat, there's no pride anymore. There is no ego. It is all about doing what we need to get done and being able to come back home safely to our families. And Banger just did a lot of work to progress that forward.
And I saw one fighter pilot bring up the idea that this AI will help us train fighter pilots better because you can put them in the sim and actually use that. So it is impressive that the AI has moved to this level, but it is not the end of the fighter pilot era, and this doesn't prove a whole lot. And I know from the last video, people were like, well, because you're a fighter pilot, you're saying that. Well, there's a couple reasons why. Number one, the training rule thing. Most of these shots and kills were done face shots. Very few times did he actually get into a control zone situation where he's driving around. That's not how we train, and that's not how we fight. And the second thing, this kind of reminded me, on that note, it reminded me of watching a DCS fight, and especially watching DCS fights against fighter pilots v DCS players, because fighter pilots, real pilots, are always at a disadvantage when you put them in simulators. This is why we don't train dogfighting in simulators, ever. We don't do dogfighting, we don't do BFM. We practice setups, we practice the basic piccolo drill, if you will, but to actually practice dogfighting, we go in the jet, because there are certain audio cues, wind rush, etc., and there are feel cues that you get in the jet that you're not going to get. Banger looks like the guy that has never flown a flight sim before trying to fly the flight sim, and even in the brief it said he wasn't very proficient, but he adapts very quickly. Well, 9 times out of 10, I mean, Gonky had this problem, I've had this problem, when you put real fighter pilots in sims and strip away all their training, because all our training is based off of pulling G's, knowing how to set your neck, knowing how, where to look, and having that wide field of view, and knowing the jet, and being able to feel, if you're fast. I guarantee you, in the real aircraft, he would know he's arcing at 600 knots and 9 Gs, versus the sim, he probably, he lost situational awareness of that while he's trying to look for the guy, and it's low fidelity and stuff. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I want to put this in perspective, because it did feel like very much like watching a DCS fight. On that note, hell, a DCS player might have done even better against AI, and he probably would have, because they're used to the lack of feedback from a flight sim / video game that a real fighter pilot is not necessarily used to. So that's one thing I want to point out. It's a little bit different. The other pieces to that, primarily, there were things that the AI had that there is no way it would have in real life with the current technology, and one being total situational awareness.
Let's remember that this is a simulation. This is a game. The machines had perfect state information, and in the real world, state information or having perfect information is something that you never have. You talk about the fog of war or uncertainty out there.
Daryl asks, how much do you believe your perfect state vector knowledge contributed to your results? Would you be able to handle the sorts of track errors that real sensor systems will hand you?
Yeah, that is a great question, Daryl. So certainly against the human, perfect state information is just way better than what Banger had in the sim, especially he's using a virtual reality headset. It's not perfect resolution. Human eyes are going to be better. So in that case, I think that helped us a lot against a human opponent.
The AI knew all of the parameters of both aircraft except for the fuel.
You have XYZ position in feet. You have some extra features like track angle and degrees, which is the angle between your nose and where the opponent is. You'll have velocity, feet per second, both out of your nose, out of the wing, and in the Z direction. You have things like health. You have your fuel state, but the opponent's fuel state is actually hidden from you. So I think total there's about 96 scalar features for our observation space.
So Heron knew exactly all of Banger's parameters. Banger didn't know all of Heron's parameters, so it could adapt. It knew the energy state and stuff. That's stuff that when we fight, we have to look outside, because most of the time you're outside of the limits of the radar. So you're just looking at using your eyeballs and going, "Yep, he looks like he's low energy because of these visual cues. Yep, he looks like this because of these cues." And they kind of put Banger at a disadvantage because they gave the AI total SA. The other thing they did was they allowed Heron to see almost 360 degrees. It could see below the jet, through the jet, and behind the jet. So it could see everywhere.
How are you going to handle the 360-degree radar / visual / other sensor coverage problem when you finally apply it to a real aircraft?
Yeah, good question there. It kind of links with the sensor tracking error noise. One of the things that we're going to try to explore here pretty soon is kind of dropping out our agent's ability to see under the aircraft or behind the aircraft. But since our agent actually uses an LSTM layer, so it's able to take into account previous time steps, it has sort of a memory. It can create trends over time. So I'm assuming a normal pilot, you're going to be able to see your opponent. You're going to kind of estimate where they're going when you don't have a visual on them. And our agents do have enough memory to be able to kind of handle that in a similar way. See where their opponents were, estimate where they're going to be in a couple of time steps ahead until you actually pick up that visual again.
In real life, it would only see where the sensors could see. So if it's a radar, it's looking out, sensor knows. If it's cameras, it's still going to be limited. I don't think we have the 360 cameras on both sides, although that to me is a little bit less of an obstacle because eventually, you will have that. But you are limited to what the sensors can do, and that includes radars that can be jammed, radars that can just not be working that day. They can gimbal, they can have all kind of other issues that they gave Heron 100% global situational awareness that he wouldn't necessarily have in a dogfight. Going back to the training rules, we're not going to, he had no collision avoidance logic. So Heron prioritized both taking shots and receiving damage or avoiding damage equally.
So the underlying simulator doesn't know about the other aircraft. So there's no collision logic. You can get directly on top of your opponent and nothing bad happens. That's obviously something that we can't do in the real world. Our agents place equal priority on damage and both taking damage and taking the health of the opponent. So some of the things that you see, again, we're talking about if you conceptualize it as aggressive behavior. Well, what's the reason for that? Because during training, if this agent thinks that it has a 51%, probability of kill at this neutral merge, it's going to take it.
It had no real self-preservation logic like a human would do. And that, some would say that's an argument in favor of AI, but at the end of the day, you need to preserve the equipment and you need to preserve the aircraft for follow-on opportunities. So going in and not being worried about colliding, you could see Banger a couple times is sacrificing the dogfight to get away from that face shot, and then that's how he ended up defensive. Would somebody shoot you in the face, so to speak, in combat? I don't know. It's really bad BFM. So, for follow-on shots, especially with missiles and all that stuff, it's just not a high probability of kill. And again, they're evaluating a cone based off of the aircraft in that cone, not necessarily pip replacement, bullet time of flight, in plane, in range. We talk about in order for a gun's track to be valid, you have to be in plane, in range, and in lead for the bullet time of flight. So in plane, basically at the same plane of motion, in range. So the 3,000 feet they do talk about in lead. Your nose has to be out in lead to get the bullets to meet where he's going to be when you shoot, and it has to be in all those conditions in the bullet time of flight. If you're shooting head on, it's very hard to calculate and it's very fleeting and it has to be very precise. Now, if it can do it, good on them. I mean, that's awesome if it can do that. I just think that that's a very low chance of success, and that's not going to work very well in the real world. That's kind of the big picture takeaways of this. Is it awesome that the AI is now able to do this? Yes. Does it tell me a whole lot? No, because you could put Banger against the DCS player, and I don't think the results would have been all that much different. I don't think and that's nothing against Banger. I think he obviously, you know, I go get in a Viper, he'd kick my ass. But in DCS is just, or in the flight simulator world, it is just so different, and it's really hard to say that this is definitive of anything when it's a simulation. Go out and put an AI in a real jet, you know, QF-16 against a Block 30 F-16, and then we'll see the results. That, to me, will prove that AI is ready for this. And then, if you want to employ this in combat, prove to me that you can do this with a perfect data link that will be able to withstand any kind of jamming, satellite disruption, hacking, any of that stuff. Prove to me that that can do that, and then you've got something. Because people say, well, AI doesn't need two-way communication, and yes, it does. Everything needs two-way communication, right? You can't have an autonomous artificial intelligence that goes out there and kills everything and has no accountability back to whatever headquarters that you have. It has to be able to take orders and receive orders and stuff like that. And I think we're decades away from seeing that. This is a leap in technology, but it's still decades away from being where people think we are now, where at the end of the fighter pilot era. I think it'll be a while before you see autonomous fighters out there. What I do think, though, is that this technology can be used to augment what we have, to go into the software of F-22s and F-16s and other aircraft to make it better, to make a human fly better, to take away some of the task loading from humans. I think that is very realistic, and that can happen very soon. I also think that you may have augmented drones where you have one fighter that's manned and drones that are flying off his wing doing taskings and stuff like that. I think that's realistic. But to have a fully autonomous fleet of nothing but drone fighters, we're ways away, because you don't want to lose that human making the decision in real time, you know, in any kind of degraded environment. So just my opinion, not necessarily, you know, I could be wrong. You know, I may be the boomer here, even though I'm not a boomer. That just doesn't want to accept technology, but I do think that the age of the fighter pilot's not over yet. So anyway, what do you guys think? I'm sure you're going to let me know in the comments, but I hope you enjoyed this breakdown into the discussion. Reminder, if you didn't catch it on the last video, Lester's GoFundMe has been set up, and it's not to pay for his medical costs. It's just to defray the expenses. He does have insurance, defray some of the expenses from his lost business, because he is a small business owner, and his insurance deductibles and other associated costs with that. So if you want to donate, I'll leave the link in the description and put a card up here for his GoFundMe. Also, don't forget to support Folds of Honor. I will be announcing a new Folds of Honor Fight for Honor 2020 tournament we'll be doing soon. And so good charity to support. And if you're looking for a good book to read, the Spectre series, aviation, military espionage thrillers, F-16 pilot related in the first book. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Excuse me. Oh, no. Oh! About a lot of that. Usually fine with the doors off. All Fox 2. Don't be a douche. That's rule number 1. Make them tell you no.